very much. It's good to be here, and I'd like to thank the Australian Farm Institute, and particularly Secretary Kia, for the opportunity to present today on this subject. Looking at the state of Queensland, which has a long history in terms of the agricultural and mining sectors, both have been key pillars of supporting the growth in the state over many, many years. If you look at some of the issues that have come to the fore in recent years, particularly have been very much about the growth of the mining petroleum industry, particularly the demand in terms of exports. And if you look at in 2010-11, the sector contributed approximately $38.9 billion, or 15% of Queensland's total gross state product. So obviously there are significant economic benefits for the state in a strong resources industry, with over 57,910 jobs and this providing the state with some $2.7 billion in royalties. One of the interesting statistics there, which illustrates some of the land use conflict issues that have arisen. If you look at it, expenditure on exploration has increased from $244.3 million in 2004 to a record $1.36 billion in 2011. Equally, agriculture is an important contributor to the Queensland economy. With the food chain value of approximately $18.7 billion, and also supporting 267,000 Queensland jobs. So in fact, more jobs than the mining sector. Like agriculture, the benefits of the resources sector are not concentrated in urban areas. The resources boom has brought jobs and people back to many remote and rural areas of Queensland. In fact, towns that were once dying with migration of populations to the city are now in fact growing rapidly. However, both the previous and the new Queensland governments have recognised that community concern about the balance between resource developments and agricultural activities needed to be achieved. So what I'm talking specifically in particular about today is the strategic cropping land framework, which was a landmark policy to safeguard Queensland's best cropping land. It is based on the presumption that high quality soils are a finite resource, developed over millions of years and not easily restored once degraded. Queensland has large areas under primary production, but soil and climatic limitations mean that significant areas are only suitable for grazing. Queensland's best cropping land is of state and national importance, and our capacity to grow crops depends on the continued availability of this resource. There you can see a photo of on the Darling Downs, where a coal mine in one part adjoins what we term strategic cropping land, just outside of Dalby. So it was a process that was followed in terms of policy development in this space. And to give you some idea of the time required for policy development, here are some of the key dates over the past 2 years. From February till March 2010, a discussion paper was released for public consultation and community forums were held. And in August, a Protecting Queensland Strategic Cropping Land, a policy framework was released for public consultation. Then in April 2011, the proposed criteria for identifying SCL, a technical report and independent expert review report, was released. And in May of last year, the government announced implementation of the SCL policy through protection and management areas and releases transition arrangement for resource development projects and a regulatory assessment statement. Then in September, the then government announced legislation to be introduced in late 2011 and provide further information on the mitigation arrangements. In December, the bill was passed by Parliament and commenced early this year. A critical part, as you can see from that, of this process has been stakeholder input. The Strategic Cropping Land Advisory Committee was established in early 2010 and continues to provide advice on the implementation of the framework. The committee includes senior representatives from the agricultural, resource and urban development sectors, as well as representatives from local government and natural resource management groups, the key players in managing our cropping resources. The purpose of the framework is to protect land that is highly suitable for cropping, manage the impacts of developments on that land, and preserve the productive capacity of that land for future generations. Professional soil scientists were employed to develop a comprehensive soil science test based on 8 criteria: slope, depth, rockiness, pH, Gilgai micro-relief, drainage, salinity and soil moisture content. The soil science criteria and test have been peer reviewed, and while agreement is not universal, there is a high level of professional acceptance around it. Scientific confidence in the criteria has been bolstered by the establishment of the Science and Technical Implementation Committee. This includes 4 professional soil scientists, 2 nominated by the Australian Society for Soil Science, and 1 each nominated by the Queensland Resources Council and the Queensland Farmers Federation. The committee provides technical advice on the implementation of the criteria for identifying SCL, periodic scientific and technical advice on implementation of the policy, a report on scientific and technical matters as part of the announced 2-year review of the new legislation. Under this test, around 4% of Queensland's land area, or 7.5 million hectares, is identified as potential strategic cropping land. The area stretches from north of Mossman to the New South Wales border and inland to cover Claremont, Emerald, Roma and St George. Within this potential strategic cropping land, the state is split into 2 zones. 1, the protection area, which incorporates the Darling Downs, Golden Triangle, Lockyer Valley and the Scenic Rim, and management areas, all other areas of the state. And the trigger maps are available and readily searchable on the web. From the farmer's perspective, if their land is identified as potential strategic cropping land, on the trigger map they do not have to assess or validate the land. If a resource development application is lodged that covers some or all of that land, the developer will undertake an SCL assessment and cover all application costs. This SCL assessment will include the soil criteria for the zone and the management area, including relevant history of strategic cropping land. Protection areas represent parts of the state where the resource development pressures on agriculture, and more particularly strategic cropping land, are considered the most acute. In these areas, future open cut mines simply cannot go ahead, except in the most limited exceptional circumstances where overwhelming benefit to the public can be proven. Developments that will be considered to be exceptional circumstances will be rare and uncommon. To be considered an exceptional circumstance, the development proponent must demonstrate that for resource developments, the resource is not found in an alternative site in Queensland, which is not on strategic cropping land. For example, a rare mineral found only in certain parts of the state. So developments that are assessed as meeting the exceptional circumstances test are still required to make all efforts to avoid and minimise any impacts on SCL. In the management area, the framework is different. Generally, mining can proceed, but only if proponents seek to avoid or minimise impacts on strategic cropping land. If that is possible, proponents are required to mitigate the loss of agricultural productivity through either a financial contribution to the mitigation fund and or negotiated mitigation measures through the deed of agreement. Mitigation rates are calculated based on values for each strategic cropping land subzone. The legislation does not preclude future coal seam gas developments because many forms of CSG activity, such as pipelines or well heads, are designed to be removed after production and therefore are not considered to permanently alienate the land. CSG activities that do, however, permanently alienate the land, like a dam, will be restricted. For certain resource activities with a temporary impact and a low risk of adversely affecting a strategic cropping land, a simplified compliance framework has been developed through the Code, which expedites approval processes while ensuring there are appropriate standards of management and protection of SCL. Resource activities that are provided for in the Code, including access tracks, underground pipes, coal seam gas wells and certain exploration activities. While resource activities that propose to comply with the Code will not require a full SCL development assessment, these applications will still be subject to rigorous assessment to ensure compliance with the Code. Looking at developments other than mining, while mining and energy resource developments are the subject of our discussion here, SCL is a genuine and comprehensive effort to preserve our limited reserves of best quality farmland for the future. And such, it restricts not just mining but any development which would permanently alienate agricultural land, except of course those things like a packing shed or a feedlot which are about increasing agricultural production. It also does not include construction and maintenance of local government and state-controlled roads and a range of other infrastructure. Since the commencement of the strategic cropping land and state planning policy, if a council has a development application before it which would permanently impact strategic cropping land, it must be referred to my department as a concurrent agency so that the state can protect it. For example, something that would trigger a development authority and is on the strategic cropping land trigger map, say a set of cabins on a property outside Dalby, a new warehouse near Mackay, or expansion beyond the town boundary in Chinchilla, would have to be considered by the state, and the state would have a say in decision making. Recently, as you would be aware, there has been a change of government in Queensland with a significant mandate. The new government is committed to developing the resource and energy sector. It's moved to appoint John Potter, a former president of AgForce, as the chairman of the new Gas Fields Commission, which is purpose is to manage the coexistence of regional landholders, rural communities and the CSG industry. The public has been invited to provide input on the powers and functions of the Commission, and the incoming government has committed to developing statutory regional plans. So what will happen, we will move from a more comprehensive planning framework based on regional plans which will indicate what activity is to happen in what areas of the state. Part of the input to that process over the next 12 months will be a Queensland agricultural land audit, which will identify land important to current and future agricultural production across Queensland, and will provide information on the location, land area and types of existing productive agricultural land as well as new or upgradable sites for potential future agricultural land. While the strategic cropping land framework continues and focus on specific soil criteria, the land audit will also consider a range of biophysical and socio-economic factors to identify productive land. It will also focus on agricultural land for all commodities, not just cropping. So the audit will form the planning basis for moving forward. The new government believes that only through a robust and comprehensive statutory regional planning framework can local aspirations be matched with the demands of the 4 economic pillars of agriculture, resources, tourism and construction. A thorough process will also identify other emerging issues and policy requirements. Examples include mapping priority land uses, identifying infrastructure needs for developing industry, assisting in planning the provision of social infrastructure such as schools, police and health services, identifying workforce and skill demands for the future, planning housing development needs to accommodate future workforces, ensuring local input to the management of land use conflicts, and coordinating state and federal policy with local government planning. Just as the statutory regional planning provides an avenue for communities to ensure their aspirations are taken into account, so too does the process involve potential certainty for industry, stakeholders and investors, because the investments at stake are substantial, by reducing the likelihood of ad hoc, burdensome legislative responses to emerging issues that could have been avoided by better planning. Hopefully, confidently, stakeholders will have a much better, clearer understanding of the planning demands and restrictions for regions they propose to operate and invest in. For example, planning processes for central Queensland, the Darling Downs and the Scenic Rim are being fast-tracked to clearly identify appropriate land uses, including strategic cropping land across each region, and map out the economic needs of those regions. So in conclusion, while the Queensland Government has been on a significant journey to develop the strategic cropping land framework, the challenge of balancing different types of land use will continue to remain a priority for government. Queensland's economic future, particularly in our rural and regional areas, will rely on successfully striking the balance between our agricultural and mining pillars with a focus on coexistence. Thank you.